Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 9 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about the tight end and quarterback positions, beginning with matchups. I'll talk about which defenses are giving up the most points to opposing tight ends and quarterbacks in order to give ourselves some perspective as to who has the most advantageous matchups going into this upcoming week and how that is going to potentially affect the upside of specific players. Then after we talk about matchups, I'll transition into the top 16 rankings of both the tight end and quarterback position, giving you guys some perspective as to how I think it's all going to stack up when all is said and done by the end of week 9, while also giving you guys some potential streaming options that you can go after if in fact you have talent on bye week. Let's not forget, there are 4 teams on bye this week, including the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Seattle Seahawks, Washington football team, and Detroit Lions. So we will not have the services of said players, so we will certainly, many of us will have to go looking for a streaming option, and hopefully you've already gone ahead and addressed that via the waiver wire, but if you have not yet already and you are looking for one, we can go ahead and help you out there today. Before we begin, I want to thank you guys for continuing to support the channel. We are very close to surpassing 56,000 subscribers, another achievement here on the channel, and I cannot thank you guys enough for helping us get there. If you are new to the channel and you want to win yourself a 2021 Fantasy Football Championship, as we're making content every single day for the entirety of the season, of course, this is the place to do it. Subscribe today. Of course, whether it is the rankings, whether it is live streams, we will be conducting a live stream after the Thursday Night Football game later tonight, as I'll be answering questions. We'll, of course, have the hidden gems, the Sunday morning live streams, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and all the content you need to win yourself a championship. Also, I mentioned it every episode, but if you have not yet already, check out Underdog Fantasy. I cannot emphasize enough how much of a great offer that they currently have. I mean, if you're looking to play fantasy sports, regardless of its fantasy football and the weekly contest, whether it's the Thursday night contest, Monday night, the Sunday battle royale, as you pick players amongst all the teams and try to dominate the fantasy football landscape, or it is fantasy basketball, hockey, there's different pick'ems contests, rivals contests, and a lot of fun to be had there. As of this current moment in time, if you use promo code Andrew, Underdog Fantasy is going to match up to $100 of your first deposit. Again, if you deposit $100, they're going to add another $100 to your entire stack and go ahead and start you off right so you can get to winning some more cash and, of course, dominating via fantasy. Again, whether it's fantasy football, later tonight's Thursday night contest, whether it's the weekly pick'ems, check that out. And if you're interested, again, use promo code Andrew. Thank you very much. All right, let's transition. Let's talk about the tight end and quarterback rankings. I wanted to go ahead and switch it up a little bit this week, and I want to talk about tight ends first and foremost. So let's go ahead and let's talk about matchups. The nearest rankings to the left of me, titled 2021 Tight End Fantasy Points Allowed, pretty much presents how many points defenses are giving up to opposing tight ends thus far this season on average in a half PPR scoring format. Again, everything that I do on a weekly basis is half PPR, meeting everyone in the middle, whether you do play in a full PPR or a standard league format. Now, going into this upcoming week, of course, the Baltimore Ravens, Kansas City Chiefs, Houston Texans, Los Angeles Chargers, Las Vegas Raiders, these teams are giving up the most points to opposing, overall tight ends every single week. And luckily, there are some streaming options that play against these defenses. For example, Tyler Conklin and the Minnesota Vikings take on the Baltimore Ravens. That is great for them. The Houston Texans take on Mike Gesicki. He's a weekly automatic start. Dallas Goedert has the privilege of taking on the Los Angeles Chargers. He's another weekly start. The Las Vegas Raiders, they will have their hands full trying to deal with Kyle Rudolph and Evan Ingram, who have both found themselves success in the last couple weeks. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, we have the Arizona Cardinals that are giving up the fewest points to opposing tight ends, but we get perhaps George Kittle returning to the lineup for the San Francisco 49ers, which could be the biggest difference maker there. The Chicago Bears take on Pat Freiermuth. I know he's had a couple good weeks here with 14 targets in the last 2 games. Hopefully that'll continue, and the momentum will lead him to success in the fantasy football landscape. Bill Belichick always loves to shut down opposing tight ends. He does it every single week. This upcoming week, there really isn't much of a competition in the Carolina Panthers offense in terms of the tight end position. Denver Broncos take on Dalton Schultz, who of course has been, Dak Prescott's one of his favorite targets this season already in terms of overall target share in that respective offense when Dak has been healthy. The New Orleans Saints, they have Kyle Pitts. We'll talk about Kyle Pitts and why he struggled last week. But either way, just wanted to kind of throw this out there, give you guys some perspective. We'll refer back to these statistics, and when we're going to talk about the quarterback position, we'll cover it once again. But these are our matchups for Week 9 of the 2021 fantasy football season. Let's begin with our number 1 overall tight end on the week. It is Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. I just want to go ahead and first and foremost mention this is the worst performance that he's coming off of since Week 1 of the 2018 season. Just putting that in perspective, just how consistent he's been. He hasn't had this bad of a performance in a while. But the thing that I found with Travis Kelce and that I wanted to go ahead and find so I could prove it to you guys, Travis Kelce it very seldom does he have these performances, but if and when he does, he has always been a bounce back player. I went back to 2016 and found a lot of performances in which he was putting up less than 6 fantasy points. And in fact, I found 6 of them. 1.1, 4.6, 4.3, 5.6, 3.4, 5.9. Now, of course, this doesn't include last week's debacle of a game in which he didn't have many points on Monday Night Football against the New York Giants. But the point that I wanted to mention those 6 performances was because in the following week's performance, after he had himself a terrible game, he always bounces back. The fantasy point contributions from Travis Kelce the following week from those games, 26.4, 20.9, 14.7, 27.5, 19.6, and 17.9. There has been a lot of success to be had from Travis Kelce, and I think he is absolutely a bounce back player. They take on the Green Bay Packers this upcoming week. I'm not worried about it. I'm firing him up. And if you are worried about it, you might as well trade him. If I can, in every single one of my leagues, I'm trying to buy low on him because I know a lot of people value him highly. But if they're feeling a certain way about Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, now's the time to buy him before he blows up. Moving on to Darren Waller, our number 2. Darren Waller is coming off of course, a week in which he was on a bye. And the week prior was dealing with an injury, so he did miss. But Foster Moreau came in, had himself 6 catches, 60 yards, and a touchdown. And just kind of solidifies once again that the Las Vegas Raiders offense is going to surround the tight end position. But many of you may be thinking to yourself, well, Andrew, Darren Waller has been a shell of himself. He has not produced up to the level that he did last season, in which I would say that's absolutely false. Though thus far this season, he has only put up 2 performances of over 10 fantasy points, I just want to kind of put it in perspective. In the first 6 games of his 2020 season, in comparison to the first 6 games of his 2021 season, in 2020, he had 55 targets in those 6 games. In 2021, he has 53 thus far. Only a 2-target difference in the first 6 games. Now, if you go ahead and look at fantasy points contributed to your team, Darren Waller in the first 6 games of the 2020 season, 70.5. This year, 66.3. There is a very little difference. I can assure you, Darren Waller is going to get back on track. The targets are going to continue to flow in, and he's going to find a lot of success. Just wait for it. With Henry Ruggs being out of this offense, there is a plethora of targets to be had. I think, of course, Darren Waller in this entire Raiders offense, they're going to rally. They're going to get themselves into a successful opportunity here. And, of course, Darren Waller is going to prove to all of you he's still a stud tight end. As we progress to our number 3 tight end, we have Mark Andrews sitting there coming off of a bye week himself. We did not have the privilege of playing a Darren Waller or a Mark Andrews last week, but this upcoming week, I mean, we're talking about Mark Andrews, who's been one of the better tight ends. I mean, since week 2 of the 2021 fantasy football season, he's been the number 1 overall tight end in total fantasy points and fantasy points per game in terms, of putting up, 14.8 fantasy points. I mean, he's better than Kelce, he's better than Waller, better than Kyle Pitts, Mike Gesicki. Does not matter. He has been better than all of them. And though he had this huge performance against the Indianapolis Colts, he's found some more consistency as of late. Just kind of want to put it in perspective. Thus far this season, the amount of targets he's gotten within the first 7 games of the season has him on pace to get 117 total targets. His best season of his NFL career was in 2019 when Lamar Jackson was, of course, the MVP. He had 98 targets that entire season. So, of course, the opportunity is continuing to grow. Lamar Jackson's throwing the ball more than ever, like we've talked about, of course, earlier this week with Marquise Hollywood Brown, and, of course, not mentioning any of those running backs in that offense. I think Mark Andrews, a fantastic play, regardless of the matchup. I know Eric Kendricks and Anthony Barr could be good coverage linebackers, but nonetheless, I think Mark Andrews, guy you're always throwing out there and firing up. We have Mike Gesicki as our number 4. Like I just mentioned with Mark Andrews being, the number 1 overall tight end since week 2, the number 2 overall tight end in fantasy since week 2 has been Mike Gesicki. And this upcoming week, he has a very advantageous matchup as he takes on the Houston Texans, giving up 14.29 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends on average this season. In the last 5 games, the Houston Texans alone have given up 5 receiving touchdowns. I mean, again, if they're going to just hand out receiving touchdowns to opposing tight ends, I think Mike Gesicki's on a very good track. Of course, the number 2 overall tight end since week 2. I know in week 1, he was quite disappointing with a 0-point performance, but let's just put it into, let's put it out on the table. Yes, he wasn't the greatest last week against the Buffalo Bills defense, but when he is in good matchups and, of course, catching the eye of Tua, who's consistently throwing him the ball, he's going to continue to find success as our number 4. Number 5 is Kyle Pitts. Now, I mentioned it earlier. He takes on the New Orleans Saints, and it is one of the tougher matchups at the tight end position, mainly because the New Orleans Saints have not given up a single touchdown to an opposing tight end this season, in comparison to, of course, the Houston Texans that we just talked about, playing against Mike Gesicki, who have given up 5 in the last 5 games. Overall, I still think that Kyle Pitts is a play. Now, the question is whether or not he's going to be a good enough one to justify him playing. I really don't care. To be honest, Kyle Pitts, he's healthy. He's ready to go. I'm playing him. Calvin Ridley's out. And the problem with the entire scenario surrounding Kyle Pitts is, well, he's probably going to start pulling number one cornerback coverage as we progress in the coming weeks, mainly because there isn't a number one wide receiver in this offense for the Atlanta Falcons. Last week, Stephon Gilmore, the 2019 Defensive Player of the Year, a top 5 cornerback in the National Football League when healthy, Gilly Lock is his nickname, was able to just pretty much cover Kyle Pitts the entire game in man coverage and just didn't allow him to do anything. Literally did not allow him to do anything. And that's my concern. If Kyle Pitts is going to begin to pull corner coverage, that is when we get into, treacherous territory in which he could end up being in a little bit of trouble because there isn't any other wide receivers to pull coverage in this team. Nonetheless, we're still firing him up. I have a lot of hope for him, but just be aware of the potential that is to come. Moving on to Dallas Goedert, our number 6. Goedert is a fantastic option. He had a season-high 7 targets this last week, playing against the Los Angeles Chargers defense that are giving up the 4th most points to opposing tight ends this season. I mean, that's 13.71 fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends. Now that we have Zach Ertz out, now that he's getting more targets, I mean, this was one of his most successful games. And again, it was a blowout against the Detroit Lions in which they didn't even have to play that much in the second half. So overall, I think Dallas Goedert, of course, in a good matchup, continuing to grow his overall opportunity in targets and is becoming more of a mainstay in this top 8 category, sits as our number 6 this week. Moving on to George Kittle, our number 7. Based on what I have heard from Kyle Shanahan, he should be practicing and, of course, playing. I did see some footage on him already practicing in the early half of that practice. Of course, the media has to leave after the stretching session of sorts, but George Kittle, nonetheless, is a stud tight end. I know he plays against the Arizona Cardinals, but in the last 3 games that Jimmy Garoppolo has played against the Arizona Cardinals, he has thrown for 10 touchdowns. And Jimmy Garoppolo, yes, is an inconsistent quarterback at times, but when you bring in another tight end option, especially one that, the last time we saw George Kittle play, he had 19 targets in the last 2 games. One that is such a huge option in this offense, and of course is going to help the bottom line of Jimmy Garoppolo. I think this offense has finally caught a stride in terms of running the ball, finding Deebo Samuel. And once they, of course, re-inject George Kittle into this offense, whether it is his contributions through the air or through the run blocking, of this offense, I think he'll find a lot of success as our number 7 tight end. Moving on to number 8, we have Dalton Schultz playing against Denver. Of course, they're one of the tougher matchups at the tight end position, but I'm not too worried about it. In the last 2 weeks, Dalton Schultz is continuing to see more and more opportunities in terms of playing. In the last 2 weeks, has played 80+% of the offensive snaps, something that he had not done all of the prior 5 games in the season. And as we continue to progress, yes, he's coming off a week in which he only had 2 catches for 11 yards, but it was with Cooper Rush at the quarterback position, and the wide receivers in this respective offense were dominating. When Dak is in there, the running game is far more potent, and of course, the tight end positions are utilized far more. The last 4 games that he has played with Dak Prescott, 80, 58, 79, and 79. Those are his receiving yardage counts. I think Dalton Schultz is a great play this week, regardless of the matchup against Denver. Moving on to the second categories of tight ends, we have Tyler Higbee pulling in as our number 9, playing against the Tennessee Titans, and I've talked about it in the last couple weeks. The Tennessee Titans are a very good defense, specifically against opposing tight ends. But in 3 out of the last 4 games, they have given up a receiving touchdown to tight ends from the Indianapolis Colts, Buffalo Bills, and Jacksonville Jaguars. As long as there's opportunity there, we know Tyler Higbee is a red zone threat in this offense. We know that they want to get him involved there. And let's be honest, when we're talking about an offense like the Los Angeles Rams, Cooper Kupp scored a touchdown last week. Robert Woods had 2. Darrell Henderson had 2. There are touchdowns to go around. And if, in fact, Tyler Higbee's in the right place at the right time and wide open, even not, to be honest, Matthew Stafford is going to get the ball to him and in a position where only he is going to be able to make a play on it. Either way, I think Tyler Higbee, a great option, a red zone threat nonetheless, and our number 9 on the week. Jared Cook is our number 10, playing against the Philadelphia Eagles. This matchup between the Chargers and Eagles is so great for the tight end position, and hopefully Jared Cook could find some success here. The reason why the Philadelphia Eagles are giving up so many points to opposing tight ends, well, let's talk about their recent performances. Hawkinson, 10 catches, 89. Foster Moreau, 6 catches, 60 and a touchdown. O.J. Howard, 6 catches, 49 and a touchdown. Tommy Tremble, 2 catches, 12 yards and a touchdown. Dalton Schultz, 6 catches, 80 and 2 touchdowns. There has been so much success to be had for the tight end position against the Philadelphia Eagles. My only concern is maybe Donald Parham stealing a touchdown, but I don't think that's going to be the case. Jared Cook's going to be on the field. He's going to be that red zone threat. He's going to end up potentially scoring this upcoming week. If not, he'll end up at least getting the yardage to solidify himself as a top 10 tight end option this upcoming week. Moving on to Hunter Henry. Now, I understand the performance of last week, 1 catch for 33 yards, especially against his former team, is super disappointing, especially considering how good of a matchup the Los Angeles Chargers are on a weekly basis. But with that said, they take on the Carolina Panthers. They did put Gilly Lock on top of Kyle Pitts, and there's always a possibility that they want to cover Hunter Henry with him, but I doubt it. I think Jacoby Myers or Kendrick Bourne, Nelson Aguilar, one of them is going to pull the coverage. Hunter Henry will be fine. I know he's touchdown dependent, but he is leading this team in receiving touchdowns. He's going to continue to be that red zone threat option, and I think as we progress in a matchup in which they should be scoring some points here, Hunter Henry should be utilized down in the red zone. Moving on to Tyler Conklin at number 12. Again, it is the easiest matchup at the tight end position, playing against the Baltimore Ravens. I mean, let's read some of the overall performances that we've seen this season alone against the Baltimore Ravens from tight ends. Waller, 10 catches, 105 and a touchdown. Kelce, 7 catches, 109 and a touchdown. Fant, 6 catches, 46 and a touchdown. Jared Cook, 4 catches, 25 yards and a touchdown. CJ Uzomah, prior to, of course, the Baltimore Ravens going on their bye-week hiatus, the Uzomah had himself 3 catches, 91 and 2 touchdowns. There have been far too many successful performances against the Baltimore Ravens defense from respective tight ends for me not to, of course, suggest Tyler Conklin as an option. He's a guy that, of course, is coming off a week, 7 targets, 5 receptions, 57 yards, 8.2 fantasy points and a half PPR. I think he's in a great position to be a streaming option and a great play in a good matchup. Moving on to CJ Uzomah. Now, like I mentioned, yes, he has had some good performances as of late, but he also disappears at times. But let's talk about CJ Uzomah and his relationship against the Cleveland Browns. In the last 3 games that he's played against the Cleveland Browns, let's mention these performances. 4 catches, 42 and a touchdown. 5 catches, 25 and a touchdown. 4 catches, 49 and a touchdown. He has something against the Cleveland Browns. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's the rival matchup. Maybe it is, the coaching staff seeing that defense has some holes. But I know it's a different defense. I know that they've, changed their personnel at times since the last time CJ Uzomah's played against them. But Joe Burrow finds a lot of success against this defense. The last 2 times he played against them, 3 touchdowns each, over 300 yards each. There's a lot of potential here. And when we look at what exactly the Pittsburgh Steelers tight ends were able to do against this defense last week, 7 catches, 82 yards, and a singular touchdown. There's a lot of potential high ceiling for CJ Uzomah. Moving on to Zach Ertz, and now we have him in a Arizona Cardinals jersey. Finally, Took a little bit of time there, but nonetheless, Zach Ertz takes on the San Francisco 49ers, giving up not the most points to opposing tight ends, but as of late, they've given up some points. The Chicago Bears found some success, 6 catches, 62 yards, and a touchdown between Cole Kmet and Jesse James. The Indianapolis Colts, between, of course, Jack Doyle and Mo Alley Cox, 3 catches, 25 yards, and a touchdown against the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of potential can be had here. As of late, this defense has been struggling in terms of covering the tight end position, and I think there's always a good chance of Zach Ertz, if in fact, of course, Kyler Murray wants to stay healthy and on the field, can find him for a lot of fantasy upside. Moving on to Dan Arnold, our number 15. Dan Arnold has seen 23 targets in the last 3 games for this team. In terms of all receiving threats, specifically the main ones like Marvin Jones, Laviska Shenault, he is in that category of just surpassing them purely. Coming off a week in which he had 8 catches for 68 yards, 10.8 total fantasy points. I think to myself, well, he takes on the Buffalo Bills, and though the Buffalo Bills have been one of the better defenses in the National Football League in terms of covering the tight end position, if in fact Trevor Lawrence is going to continue to look to his safety blanket at the tight end position in Dan Arnold, well, we cannot ignore it. And he's not even just a good half PPR threat. In a full PPR, he becomes that much more valuable. Of course, red zone upside is there for all tight ends. It's just a matter of whether or not the Jacksonville Jaguars can get down there in order to expose that opportunity. Moving on to our final tight end option, it is Pat Freiermuth. We just mentioned him coming off of a week in which he did perform well against the Cleveland Browns defense, catching himself 4 passes on 7 targets, 44 yards and a touchdown, 14 targets in the last 2 weeks, with Juju Smith-Schuster out, with Eric Ebron missing time, and of course this offense needing a player that is going to dominate over the middle against linebackers. Pat Freiermuth is able to get it done and solidifies himself as the final tight end option that I wanted to suggest going into this upcoming week. There are other players, perhaps an Evan Ingram or perhaps other tight ends like Mo Alley Cox playing later tonight that may be an option. And if in fact they are the only opportunities that you have of getting a tight end streaming option, then go for them, no problem. But for right now, they just barely missed the cut. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. Let's talk about matchups at the quarterback position and close today's video with our top 16 quarterback ranking. So let's talk about matchups. In terms of giving up the most points to opposing quarterbacks thus far this season on average in a 4-point per passing touchdown format, we have the Washington football team, Kansas City Chiefs, Miami Dolphins, San Francisco 49ers, and Atlanta Falcons giving up the most points. While on the other side of the coin, of course, we have the Buffalo Bills, Arizona Cardinals, Denver Broncos, Los Angeles Chargers, and New Orleans Saints really holding it down. But as of this current moment in time, we won't have the opportunity of playing a quarterback against the Washington football team. We'll have a rookie, unproven quarterback like Jordan Love playing against the Kansas City Chiefs. That's very, very sketchy, but you have to be in a desperate position to potentially play that. We have Tyrod Taylor returning, playing against the Miami Dolphins, which certainly could be something enticing in future weeks. Of course, it definitely helps the receiving options in that offense, but for now, that's not the greatest overall position. Kyler Murray, though he has a great matchup, he is injured. We don't know what the entire status of that is, but we'll talk about that as we continue. And then we have the Atlanta Falcons playing against another quarterback that hasn't played football in the last 3 weeks due to a concussion and has to take his potential first start. There is a lot of inconsistency, or I guess potential for failure at the top here against the greatest matchups. But either way, if you want to go ahead and play your matchups, that would be the way to go about it. Either way, just wanted to present these statistics and kind of just show you guys who's giving up the most points. We'll refer back to these statistics as we progress through the video, but nonetheless, just wanted to show you that there's a lot of inconsistency, but hopefully you went ahead, you found yourself a streaming option this upcoming week that can find you success, and hopefully will be on our top 16 list this week. Here we go. Let's begin with our number one overall quarterback on the week, Josh Allen. Josh Allen, in my opinion, again, he plays against Jacksonville. What are we talking about? Nothing else really needs to be said after that, besides the fact, of course, since week 3, in the last 5 games that Josh Allen has played, he's averaging 30.78 fantasy points per game in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. We're talking about Geno Smith last week going into Jacksonville, throwing for an 83% passing completion percentage and 2 touchdowns, completely torching. I think he was 20 for 24 passing. With what we've seen out of Josh Allen, of course, being so consistent through the air and now starting to get himself more and more involved on the ground, red zone rushing attempts, rushing touchdowns, rushing yards. I mean, he's coming off a week of 55 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. It's continuing to build his overall potential. He's a fantastic play this week as our number one. Number 2 is Matthew Stafford. Speaking of consistency, that is what I'm looking for at the quarterback position, and that's what we always want. And, of course, great matchups. Playing against the Tennessee Titans, giving up the 7th most points to opposing quarterbacks, we have Matthew Stafford. In his last 3 consecutive games, he has thrown for over 3 touchdowns in every single one of them. In order to kind of give you some perspective on the stats, 251 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns for 25 points in one of those games. Of course, the next one, 334 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, all for 27.16 fantasy points. And then this last week against Houston, 305 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns for 24.2. If they wanted to, they could have completely killed that Houston Texans team and just poured on. Obviously, they took their foot off the gas offensively and defensively, gave them some garbage time touchdowns. But nonetheless, when you're playing against a team that is a playoff contender, like the Tennessee Titans, there's no better time to prove your dominance than dominate a team like that on primetime television. That's Matthew Stafford at number 2. We're moving on to Lamar Jackson coming off the bye week, which of course gives him a little bit of time to rest, gets his offensive line healthy, gets his running backs healthy. But first and foremost, the question is, what Lamar Jackson are we going to see? Because the last time we saw him play against the Cincinnati Bengals, though he did put up 23.08 fantasy points, which again is a fantastic performance, the unfortunate reality was that Lamar Jackson had his worst passing game of the season. 15 for 31 passing, 48% passing completion percentage. Of course, what was saving him that game was his 88 rushing yards. And let's not get it twisted. I mean, he's ran for already 480 rushing yards in 7 games. It's about 68.7 yards per game on average. As long as he's going to continue to run the ball, find success, I don't care what defense you're putting in front of him, Lamar Jackson is going to succeed. The fact that he's throwing even more continues to rise his overall upside. He's a fantastic player as our number 3. Moving on to Dak Prescott, our number 4, taking on the Denver Broncos. Again, another stat that I want to mention. Besides the fact that Cooper Rush was able to come in, throw for 325 yards and 2 passing touchdowns last week, I mean, just let that sink in. A backup quarterback, that just tells you not only how talented Cooper Rush is as a quarterback just coming in on his first NFL start, but it tells you just how impactful the entire offensive line, running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, they all contribute. And when you put in the 1x variable of a Dak Prescott, it takes it to the next level. In the last 9 games that Dak Prescott has played as the starting quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys and played fully, of course, not leaving with an injury, In 8 of those 9 games, he has thrown for 3 or more touchdowns. The streak continues to build. I mean, this season alone, except for, of course, that Week 2 game against the Los Angeles Chargers, he has scored 3 or more touchdowns in every single game. I don't think that the Denver Broncos defense is going to have a chance against Dallas this week. I think that's Dak Prescott, of course, continuing to build consistency and continuing to build a plethora of performances here that just give him the right to be in the top 4 conversation. Moving on to Joe Burrow, our number 5. Our thumbnail for this week. Joe Burrow takes on Cleveland, giving up the 8th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Joe Burrow thus far this season has thrown for 2 or more touchdowns every single game. He has had 3 consecutive games of 3 or more touchdowns. And of course, last season when he took on the Cleveland Browns defense, 316 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 406 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. He has been a machine. And he's been far greater than I thought he was going to be this season, as I thought, maybe the offensive line would truly be an issue. But it hasn't been that big of a problem for him. Though, yes, he gets pressured a good amount of times. He gets sacked a good amount of times. Doesn't matter. Joe Burrow's a gunslinger. He's continuing to succeed. And in such an advantageous matchup with the weapons that he has surrounding him, I'm all in on Joe Burrow. Moving on to Patrick Mahomes, our number 6. You may be wondering, wow, where did we get to where in 2021 we have Joe Burrow ahead of Patrick Mahomes in a weekly start? Now, look, let's just put it out on the table. It looks like Patrick Mahomes has kind of lost confidence. There's not a lot of energy out there on the field for this Kansas City Chiefs offense. When they score touchdowns, it seems like it's a chore. When they, it doesn't feel like they're getting a boost of energy for scoring. I don't know what it is. But when I watch them, there's a lot of critical mistakes, whether it is penalties, whether it's people running the wrong routes, whether it's people dropping passes into defenders' hands for interceptions, whether it's the offense turning over the ball. I mean, their turnover rate, plus minus, is the worst in the National Football League. Their defense doesn't get any turnovers, and their offense is just coughing it up every single way they possibly can. And yes, that kills momentum. On top of the fact that, of course, defenses are not getting out of their cover 2 shells and forcing Patrick Mahomes to settle with whatever they give him underneath, it has made him a lesser option. But nonetheless, hopefully this week, the Green Bay Packers matchup can be one that wakes him up. It literally will only take one drive or one play to snap him out of this, and it's only a matter of time until we get Patrick Mahomes back to where he normally is and at the top of the league at the quarterback position. Moving on to Justin Herbert. Speaking of being a little bit inconsistent as of late, Justin Herbert, the last 2 games that he has had, 56 and 51% passing completion percentage. That is not like Justin Herbert. He's kind of fallen apart as of late, and his performances are, of course, speaking volumes, as he just really hasn't done much. Now, this upcoming week, they take on the Philadelphia Eagles. And, the Philadelphia Eagles, yes, technically they haven't given up many points to opposing quarterbacks this season. Who have the Philadelphia Eagles beaten this year? Who have they really stopped? The Detroit Lions, the Atlanta Falcons? Those aren't really good teams. They're, of course, at the bottom of the league for a reason. And we're talking about Justin Herbert of all quarterbacks, one that is probably going to follow in the footsteps of some of these other quarterbacks that have succeeded against the Philadelphia Eagles this season. Derek Carr, 323 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Brady, 297 and 2. Mahomes, 278 and 5. Dak, 238 and 3. There's a lot of potential here. Hopefully, Justin Herbert snaps out of it and figures it out as our number 7 this week. Number 8 is Jalen Hurts. The only kryptonite that Superman has, and I'm going to start calling Jalen Hurts Superman until further notice, until Cam Newton gets back into the league, because they're pretty much the same quarterback. They're not going to get much done through the air, but on the ground, they are just demons. It is fantastic to see Jalen Hurts getting himself 71 rushing yards this last week, but because of how much of a blowout it is, we found that the pure kryptonite for a player like Jalen Hurts is the overall, success of that team. When they're winning games, his upside isn't as high. But when they're in situations where the game script is negative and they have to run the ball and score garbage time in the fourth quarter, well, Jalen Hurts is an unstoppable machine. This last week was, of course, the first time we had seen him produce less than 20 fantasy points in a game this season. It was quite underwhelming, but this upcoming week they take on the Chargers. It seems like there could be a lot of opportunity for fourth quarter garbage time, and if there isn't, I'll be surprised because, again, the Los Angeles Chargers defense and their secondary has been very good. And in terms of stopping a quarterback like Jalen Hurts, it's very capable of doing so. Moving on. The second category of quarterbacks, starting off with number 9 through 16, we have Tua Tagoviloa. And the reason why I have Tua at number 9 is because, again, it's an incredible matchup, and he's actually been really good as of the last 3 games since coming back from his respective rib injury. In the last 3 games, he has been the number 4 overall quarterback in fantasy football. Can you actually believe that? He has had himself a lot of success, and though many people were a little afraid of him last week against the Buffalo Bills, he still had himself a great performance, getting himself that 2-point conversion, getting himself a rushing touchdown. The Houston Texans, of course, giving up the 6th most points to opposing quarterbacks. The last 2 games that they've played were against Matthew Stafford and, Kyler Murray, who both went for 3 touchdowns against them. I think Tua is in a fantastic spot and is a fantastic waiver wire option this week. Moving on to Kyler Murray. Speaking of Kyler Murray, the last time we saw him perform well, yes, was a couple weeks back against Houston, but he did deal with an injury this last week. He didn't have DeAndre Hopkins against that Green Bay Packers defense, and everything kind of fell apart. And, of course, they scored touchdowns, but all 3 of them went to running backs scoring on the ground. And that is an unfortunate factor, but it is something that is going to happen to the quarterback position. Cliff Kingsbury has been quoted to say this week that Kyler does not have to practice at all this week in order to play in Sunday's game against the San Francisco 49ers. I'm hoping that's going to be the case, but there's a little bit of a concern with a quarterback that is so mobile at times, and even though he doesn't get a lot of rushing yards as of late this season, similar to the back end of the 2020 season, Kyler Murray has still been an effective quarterback because he has the ability to run out of the pocket. And if he's going to be limited in that factor, and he's going to be going up against a pass rush like the 49ers, it's going to be very difficult for him to hobble out of that pocket if he's not fully healthy. I'm hoping he's healthy. I'm hoping he gets a full practice sometime this week. But either way, he's our number 10 as long as he plays. Moving on to number 11, we have Kirk Cousins. Of course, Kirk Cousins coming off of a bad performance, but let's put it into account. I'm going to forget that Dallas Cowboy game. I'm moving on. I'm looking down the line, and we have Baltimore this upcoming week for the Minnesota Vikings. And, the last time we saw Baltimore, they got 40 points dropped on them by Joe Burrow. And to be honest, there is a very good chance that the Minnesota Vikings could expose this defense because there are, positions in which, of course, you could end up finding a lot of success against Baltimore. It's no longer like the Baltimore defense of old. Though the Baltimore Ravens' identity has often been their defense, this team is very inconsistent. They will give up points in bunches, and they will put their team in a very bad position, especially if the offense for Lamar Jackson isn't succeeding immediately. And if they start getting into trouble and having to punt early, there could be a very good chance that Kirk Cousins, this offense, will be able to redeem themselves this week as our number 11. Moving on to Derek Carr, our number 12. Derek Carr has been absolutely incredible this season. In 6 out of his 7 games, he has thrown for 2 or more passing touchdowns. He's found a lot of success because, again, not only is he scoring via touchdowns, he's also getting it done through the air. The Las Vegas Raiders have the 2nd most passing yards per game on average this season with 307.9, only behind Tom Brady's Tampa Bay Buccaneers offense, which, of course, leads in terms of passing yards per game and, of course, passing attempts per game. But either way, Derek Carr, they take on the New York Giants, of course, giving up the 13th most points to opposing quarterbacks. His consistency has been far too great. Yes, he was on a bye week last week. He's coming off of that. I think he'll be perfectly fine in this upcoming week's matchup. Find a lot of success against the New York Giants. Moving on to Carson Wentz, playing against the New York Jets tonight on Thursday Night Football. I believe that, yes, Carson Wentz has been incredible, and I've been mentioning it for like the last 4 weeks now. Carson Wentz is building momentum. 5 consecutive weeks are 2 or more touchdowns for this quarterback. He's playing against the New York Jets, who, of course, as of late, Joe Burrow, 3 passing touchdowns, 259. Mac Jones, 307 and 2 touchdowns. Matt Ryan, 342 and 2 touchdowns. A lot of teams find success against the New York Jets. But my only concern is, because it's a short week, this team might want to just run the ball purely and just give Jonathan Taylor all of the touches. And that's why I have Jonathan Taylor as my number 1 overall running back. There could be a week here in which Carson Wentz takes a little bit of a seat back. He doesn't throw the ball 51 total times. Obviously only completed 27 passes last week. Turned over the ball in crucial scenarios. But either way, Carson Wentz scores. He finds value. And he's going to continue to be a great overall streaming option. Moving on to Taysom Hill on number 14. Playing against the Atlanta Falcons, giving up the 5th most points to opposing quarterbacks. Again, the last 2 quarterbacks that have found really good success against this team, Tua Tagoviloa, 291 and 4 touchdowns. And Taylor Heinicke, 290 and 3 touchdowns. So, again, the quarterback talent there isn't the highest. And when we look at Taysom Hill, he is a touchdown machine, and he is a fantasy machine, very similar to Jalen Hurts. He has that kind of upside. In the last 4 games that we saw Taysom Hill play in 2020, 1 was against Philadelphia, 2 were against Atlanta, 1 against Denver. The Philadelphia game, had himself a decent game overall, scored some touchdowns, no big deal. Against Denver, that was the game last season where the Denver Broncos did not have a starting quarterback. But against the 2 Falcons games, he dominated. He scored touchdowns and wouldn't be stopped. Already this season, he has 3 rushing touchdowns, and he doesn't even get much playing time. He hasn't played in the last 2 games. and he's already been a viable option on the goal line for this team. Last season's performances in a 4-point per passing touchdown league go as such: 24.22, 17.52, 23.58, and 18.94. I would take that every single given week. That kind of opportunity, the ability to run the ball, find value in the red zone, regardless of who he's throwing the ball to, Taysom Hill has a lot of value this upcoming week. Moving on to Ryan Tannehill. I understand you may have some hesitations. You may want to watch and wait and see what exactly the Tennessee Titans are capable of without Derrick Henry. But the last time we saw Derrick Henry take a little bit of a rest was in 2019. It was against the New Orleans Saints, in which the Tennessee Titans knew they didn't need to win that game against the Saints. What they needed to do was win Week 17's matchup against Houston. And of course, they rested Derrick Henry in Week 16. They played Week 17 and dominated against Houston. But in the one game that he's played without Derrick Henry in the lineup, against the New Orleans Saints 2019, 272 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. Dion Lewis was the starting running back in that game, had 87 total yards. I think Ryan Tannehill is going to prove, of course, he is a good quarterback. He's been elite in the last couple of years, and though this season he hasn't proven that, I think we'll get back to, of course, the better days of Ryan Tannehill, starting this week against the Los Angeles Rams. Our final option at the quarterback position is Daniel Jones, taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Daniel Jones has been a decent quarterback. Has he been consistent? At times, sure. But hopefully this week he gets Saquon back. And if in fact that's going to be the case, he has Evan Ingram, he has Tony, he maybe has Goedert and Shepard. I mean, if the offense is going to be fully healthy, I think there's a very good chance that Daniel Jones gets himself in a good position to not only score fantasy points, but be able to be, a consistent option going forward. The weapons that surround him often do dictate whether or not he's going to find success, because a lot of these guys are catching the ball, making plays after the catch, and set him up for success. That's why talent matters so much in regards to a quarterback's overall potential. Either way, when we look at the Las Vegas Raiders defense, Hurts, 236, 2 touchdowns, 61 rushing yards against them. Teddy Bridgewater, 334 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns against them. The thing that kind of has both those quarterbacks in common is the fact that both of them benefited heavily from garbage time. And I think that is going to be the case this week for Daniel Jones. Garbage time could be a factor and certainly help him. Those are our Week 9 quarterback and tight end rankings for the 2021 fantasy football season. I want to thank you all for watching. If you guys have not yet already, help us get to 56,000 subscribers by clicking the subscribe button, clicking the like button down below, sharing. Again, be a friend, tell a friend. And of course, check out Underdog Fantasy. Use promo code Andrew today. With your first deposit, Underdog Fantasy is willing to match up to $100. Again, that is an incredible offer. You drop $100, they're going to give you $100. If you're interested, check that out. Link down in the description, promo code Andrew. All right, guys. Until next time, thank you very much. I'll be streaming after tonight's Thursday Night Football game. If you're not there, I'll see you next time. Peace.